Hello, I'm Lorthorn, and here are my thoughts on Age of Empires 4 Stress Test Open Beta. In the background is the first game I played, which is going to be cut down in length to match the audio of my thoughts. So I hope you enjoy. The game is not Age of Empires 2. I think that's one of the more important things to start with. It feels a lot like Age of Empires 2, and if you go into the game with the mindset that you're playing Age of Empires 2, you can basically get away with playing the game. The game is also not Age of Empires 3. It is far less Age of Empires 3 than Age 2, but it is definitely not Age of Empires 3. It does sit somewhere in between the two games in general feel. I think they took a lot of good aspects from both games and tried to mix them into one finished product. That being said, I do not know if this game will be a greater successor to Age 2 or will be another flavor of Age 2 to play. Now why I say that is there are so many parallels I've been able to draw from Age of Empires 2 to Age of Empires 4. Villagers gather in much the same way. Combat seems to flow in a very similar vein, although there's a few extra aspects to it. And just so much of the mechanics are basically identical. You have the stone, you have the gold, you have the wood, you have the food. You gather them to age up. Food and gold are what you need to age up. There's medieval soldiers of the same kind. However, there's also major differences. The factions seem fairly different from each other compared to Age of Empires 2. Although I have troubles distinguishing the English and the HRE from each other, I did find that basically all other civs act so completely differently that there's different games almost that you're playing. The major distinction one of the major distinctions I have found, one of the major things that distincts this game from Age of Empires 2 is the ease of the beginning game. One of the scary entry points to Age of Empires 2 is getting the timings down on the early game, getting everything perfect, and producing lots of villagers. This game's entry point feels a lot easier. Villagers' production time is simpler, it's more forgiving with food, it's more forgiving with building houses. Idle time, well, still probably not a good thing to have, feels slightly less punishing. And while I'm certain we will figure out how to optimize the game and play it better in the future, the current just general field of the start of the game is a lot calmer, not as much panic. You have to do things perfectly, and that's just from the allowances of there being more berry bushes to gather from, more sheep to eat from. It's easier to collect the sheep. Hunting deer is a luxury thing you can take your time to do with your scouts. Shoot it, drop off sheep in a very nice, easy way. There's not this super harsh panic of, oh, how do I manage my resources in the early game, from the sheer abundance of them. From both games I've played, the combat feels about similar to me as it does at Age 2. Being my skill level is relatively low, it seems like I fling units of the correct kinds against the enemy's units, and they mutually destroy each other until I come out on top for having a better unit composition, and then I use siege units to win the game. I really like the capturing sacred sites as a victory condition, but that's a smaller nuanced detail and it's just a different way to win. Aging up feels a lot like the Asian civilizations from Age of Empires 3. You pick an age up bonus. You build a giant castle, or you build a giant tower. In some other cases, you choose what scientific bonuses you want. And the aging up feels a lot more like Age of Empires 4. In general looks, the game looks like a weird hodgepodge between Age 2 and Age 3, looking better than Age 3, but worse than Age 2. And also having, I don't know, some sort of, it just feels slightly washed out. It needs to be sharper or more defined, or it needs to be more depth. The UI I like fairly well. It's not Age 2 UI. And I feel that's one of the problems, is they wanted to distinct it from Age 2 AI. And so they tried to make it fancy. When you use the cursor, it has this little golden thread pillar that shoots out. Looking at through buildings and stuff is just not as simple because they have this sort of gray gold border, which is trying to make the game look all modern or historic. I'm not exactly certain, or like an atlas, versus the very simple 90s static pixelated blocks of H2, which are far easier to comprehend. For me, anyways. I could just be used to them, which is something I have to take account for. But the interactive tutorial at the start is very useful, I think will help people to learn, especially in this stress test. I find it slightly annoying when it keeps telling you to do one thing over and over again or just leave me alone, but that's my own problem. Again, back to the UI. Continuing on the UI, I don't like that you can't see the little set flags in the Fog of War. I would like to have my set flags in the Fog of War so I can know where my scout's going to wander to. And telling units to go to a spot to gather seems to have a lot less of a forgiving area to click on. I several times have tried to click on sheep to set a gather point for my villagers to go and start collecting, or I've tried to set a berry bush for my villagers to go gather on, or even a gold mine, and sometimes they get produced from the TC and walk right next to the location and just stand there and Isle Villager. But speaking of the Isle Villager, the UI for them is very nice, and this takes a feature from several other RTSs, which is if a villager is idle, they have little Z's going above their head showing that they're sleepy and idle. And this allows you to distinctly make out which villagers are idle and which aren't, which is a big problem of number 2, where it's like, oh, I have idle villagers. Oh, so this guy's standing in the corner. Whereas if you can see the Z's going up with their head, it's like, hey, he's not working. He's sleeping on the job. Get back to work. It just feels a lot like Age of Empires 2, which is weird because Age 3 did not feel like Age of Empires 2. They had very similar things, but instead of trying to do an upgrade or improve it, they made a different game. Whereas this just feels like they're trying to upgrade it, make it modern, and make it more accessible. I think that's one of the major things they're trying to do, is make it more accessible to a wider audience. So it's easier to pick up, and it's a game you can get into with your friends, just like, oh, Age of Empires, isn't that game complicated? The starting of the game is so annoying. I just can't go through with that game start. I just can't get hammered down. Whereas this game feels like, oh, let's jump into Age of Empires 4. We can play it for a bit, and if you're good, then you can quickly beat the opponent. But it's not, it's just sort of a more comprehensive, oh, this is this, this is this. And that could also just come from the game not having years and years of history of which it could be perfected. So, again, bias of time and skill are definitely being put on this game. But it feels like an RTS that's easier to just jump onto and play. But they're also trying to design it at the same time for Age of Empires 2 players. So they want to keep on giving Age of Empires 2, instead of trying to make a new game like they did with number 3, which I think I've said before here, but I want to reiterate that this game feels a lot like Age of Empires 2, but it isn't Age of Empires 2. It has, I don't know, it feels like a game trying to capture something while trying to be its own thing. It just leaves it in this sort of weird, vague state. And I quite enjoy it. I find it very fun to play. I would like to be able to play against the AI, so I have more time to think because I'm playing against human players. But it still definitely plays like a good game. And it also plays like H2. I don't know, I feel like I'm repeating myself. There's features and different things that I really enjoy, but it's also just... It's weird. It's literally like 2/3 Age of Empires 2, 1/3 Age of Empires 3. Put that together, mix it all up, maybe sprinkle in a few UI changes, some modernization, and you get Age 4. Early thoughts on the game, anyways. Early thoughts. And with that, we're done. So thank you for watching. I'll catch you all next time.